Hello, hello, hello out there in the community radio universe. You're tuned into 101.1 FM on your radio dial, which is affectionately known as KFUG, right here in lovable Crescent City, California, and all those environments beyond its rocky Pacific shores, thanks to live streaming at kfugradio.org. Folks, we are truly a community non-commercial radio station. Yahoo! None of those irritating commercials you have to put up with. We don't deal with them here. But it also means we're funded by local, state, and national grants, and we always need financial support by you, the local, big-hearted people that call Crescent City, California, and beyond their home. Community also means that we're staffed and run by local folks just like you. And if you have a penchant for becoming involved in any capacity here at KFUG, please reach out to us and experience the wonderful world of the airwaves. If you call this area home, aren't we lucky? We're located in the vortex of good vibes and resonating souls in arguably one of the most beautiful, coastal, mountainous, forested, laked places on this earth, that being the northernmost coastal tip of the state of mind known as Crescent City, California. Again, welcome. I'm Jacques Kepner, your host for the next hour of Jacques Talks. Now, did I say Jock Talks? Well, if you're expecting open sports discussion, we'll have to wait for a future broadcast for that. But I also, at this moment, want to give a big thanks to Paul Kurtz and his tireless work as KFUG's radio manager and giving me this opportunity and the guidance to air this live broadcast. He is an eloquent and fun, cool guy. Again, welcome. Today's subject and discussion is all about pot. You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, or if it is, or a combination of any. Also known as marijuana, or weed, or bud, or skunk, or reef, or ganja, and so many other nicknames. I subtitled the show The Good, Bad, and Ugly because I wanted to talk about the West Coast marijuana market and right here in Crescent City and possibly Brookings and to wherever you are in listening range. Well, here to plumb the depths of this fascinating, provocative plant is Eric G., who is the owner of Fifth and Green here in Crescent City. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Jacques. I appreciate it.
All right. How are you today? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll ask some questions about the state of marijuana and beyond. So we were discussing a little bit earlier, you've kind of grown up in the marijuana industry.
Yeah. I was a lucky individual, a lucky soul enough, if you think that way, to have been born and raised in the North Coast. I'm a multi-generational cannabis person. My father was a cannabis grower. And most of the community that I grew up and raised in, we were all either farmers or construction workers, but we all grew plants and cannabis on the side. So it's been quite a life, and it's an exciting time for people like myself and people who are just interested to get into this new industry.
Yeah, when I reached out a couple of weeks ago wanting to talk to some dispensary owners and what the state of the marijuana business is in this area particularly and beyond, I kept hearing your name. You kept saying Eric. Eric's the guy. He's well spoken. He's eloquent, and he's got the knowledge there. So
well, I will say that there was a point in my life where that probably wouldn't have been a good thing.
Maybe so.
But yeah, no. I appreciate that, and I really I'm humbled by that actually. There's a lot of wonderful individuals here who worked tirelessly to basically bridge the gap between the illicit black market and the legal market and really try to get local approval from our politicians. There was a number of people who, at the very beginnings of this, I've got to mention Robert from Sticky Grove. He was somebody that, literally did put himself out there at a time before legalization during the medical 215 days and was willing to try to provide for the community. Unfortunately, he ran into health issues and stuff that have unfortunately he had to close the shop. But Robert, there was another gentleman, a good friend of mine and good friend of Robert's, Jesse Davis. I think he had been on this show or on KFUG a number of times during the during the lead up to our discussions with the Del Norte County supervisors. That was a big deal. Back at that point, there wasn't really anybody talking about it. There wasn't anybody, in 2016 we voted for Prop 64. And we noticed here locally that there just wasn't a lot of discussion. So we got together as a small group and started the Del Norte Growers Association, which was just a small muck group of 3 or 4 people who were like, let's get together at Patrick's Creek Lodge and try to get some people together and see if we can get numbers, because we knew from experience watching other localities that the sheer volume of people and the voices is what makes the change. So we started there. It was really a grassroots effort, just a couple small people, and that grew. And eventually the Del Norte County supervisors heard us. They saw us. We would pack the supervisor board meetings with 20, 30 people, and we'd all try to take up whoever would be willing to speak for their 3 minutes. We felt like you get 3 minutes to speak, take it and use it. Right. And that made a difference.
Right on. So you've been in the industry all your life.
Yep.
And now you're the owner of the Fifth and Green, which I just found out. I had that kind of ask around, where is Fifth and Green? Everybody says behind the Safeway.
Right.
That's it. Just go behind the Safeway and see the big green cross.
Which is scary, because before you would never go behind Safeway.
Yeah, right. Like, what am I going back behind the Safeway?
Right, exactly.
But it's like a compound. It's actually pretty nice. It's a big building. What was there originally?
Actually, the history of that site is actually, it's got a long history here in Crescent City. The building originally was built by the Mac Peep Mill family. So that was the original site for the Mac Peep Mill, behind where the storage units are now.
Like their office?
It was the original office building. And over the period of time after the Mac Peep Mill bankruptcy and closure, I think it sat stasis for a while. But then it became the tribal community affairs building. And so it actually housed some of the local native children for school. Huh. And so there was a lot of different things that were done there. Then after that, I leased it. So in the run up to the Del Norte County supervisors, I leased that building for like 18 months because I really felt like that was a really prime place to place a dispensary due to the overwhelming voice in the community. I was president at every single meeting for 4 years, and I heard and I listened to what everybody was saying at that time. Community members who were against it, and politicians who were against it, and people who were for it. And I felt like that was just really kind of an out-of-the-way place. Plus, it was a dilapidated area of Crescent City that really was just kind of being run down. And I felt like that would be a perfect place, outside of the fact that it's close to a lot of parking for Safeway and whatnot.
Yeah, if they know you're there. And again,
exactly.
Once I was told that, then I saw the big green cross. And I said, there we go. And you got a new deck, it looks like, too. It says,
totally,
caution, don't slip on this deck.
Yeah, exactly.
Going to put down some sandpaper on the...
Totally, yeah. We were going to do that, and then it rained, and it just started raining, and it never stopped over this winter. So there's a lot of work to do, man. It's a constant moving change. One
green industry vacates it due to its collapse, the basic mill, and then a new green industry comes in.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it's a weird circle, right?
Yeah. How neat is that? Now, what are the trends? Let's jump into something. What are the trends? The typical person walks into a dispensary and they see the counters, and they've got the marijuana buds, and then they got all these like candy things and gummies and things. What's the hottest selling thing? I mean, what's out there right now that's really trending?
Ultimately, I think flower is still king. In terms of what people are looking for when they come in, flower is still the number one product that I sell. Now there's variations of that product in terms of the quality, price points, and whatnot. But generally, when somebody comes into the dispensary, from my experience so far, they're generally looking for flower. Now, concentrates are a big thing. Concentrates are basically the concentrated form of the cannabis oil. There's various forms of it. There's the dabbable forms, which is a concentrated live resins, diamonds, things of that nature that you can put into a bong, or what they call a dab rig. I don't really like to use that term because I'm a little bit older, but those are kind of the new wave kind of products that people are consuming at this point. Vapor cartridges are really big because they're very discreet. They're portable. Vape cartridges. You know, they have been getting kind of a little bit of a bad name over a period of time because of mostly material that they were using for the construction of the carts. You know, we have to kind of take a step back for a minute and really realize that, you know, this industry was created from basically absolutely nothing. And so in order to scale something, you have to have multiple layers of products available to you, and also material to make those products. And when you kind of just create something out of nowhere, you're going to run into bumps in the road. You know, we didn't, in California, the first sales of cannabis didn't happen until, you know, basically 2020-ish, 2019. So, I mean, you know, to scale something to serve a 40 million populated state is tremendous. And so there's bumps. But I mean, when it comes to new products, I think vape cartridges are definitely starting to get up there because it's something that's portable. You know, us being here in Crescent City, I think it's such a different marketplace than anywhere else. We are actually one of the few marketplaces in the state of California that actually our only competition is another state. You can go in other places in California where you have border towns that border, say, Nevada. Arizona is now legal. So you're going to start to see some of these differences pop up in other areas. But that in and of itself has created a unique marketplace here. And so when I built the business plan to start this business, I really studied the Oregon market because I realized at the very beginning that was going to be my competition.
You studied the Oregon
I did.
market.
I studied the Oregon market as much as I could. Yeah. I have a lot of friends in Oregon, and I have a lot of friends who are in the legal market space in Oregon, and also Washington. But I felt like Oregon was basically the one that we had to compete with. Brookings. You know, it's funny. Brookings is an anomaly in the state of Oregon. It was the second largest per capita individual price point in the state of Oregon. So the only other county in the state of Oregon that sold more per person in terms of the dollar amount per person a year spent would be Baker County in the top of Oregon. Yeah. And a lot of that was due to the fact that, you know, Brookings, fortunately for them, was bordering an area of California that was prohibitive of cannabis. You know, Del Norte County has always been fairly prohibitive of the cannabis industry, of the illicit growers that were here, the families that were growing cannabis to support themselves. Even though that was really a big part of our economy. You know, I mean, families growing up here supporting themselves and then reinvesting that money in the community. So Brookings was basically my kind of poster child for how I wanted to operate my business.
And Brookings, if I'm not mistaken, has 12 or maybe even 13 dispensaries for a town that's slightly smaller than Crescent City. That's like having 13 McDonald's in town.
Exactly.
Like, what do you do? I mean,
well, it makes sense from a capitalistic standpoint. I mean, you know, if you're serving a community that, you know, is bordering another community that doesn't have access to a specific product, like, you know, say Crescent City couldn't sell sandwiches. For whatever reason. And Brookings was the only place close that sold sandwiches. We would all drive up, because I'm a sandwich fiend, I would drive up to Brookings and buy my sandwiches, which would skew the actual sales that city would do. So, you know, I think that was the most unique thing that I experienced within this space was my competitive nature came out, and I said, you know, we're creating a state-funded thing here. This is going to be a state-by-state industry. And I don't want our community members to be forced to break federal law. That was my biggest argument. When we were meeting with the local governments in their meetings and stuff and personal conversations with them, it was always about, if you guys don't allow for recreational access here locally, you're going to be forcing your local constituents to drive across a state border with cannabis. That's breaking federal law. That's exactly what the federal government is trying to stop. And that really resonated. That and also the monetary reasons. You know, once they realized that there was a significant amount of money being spent in another state, in another community that was not being seen here, that changed the entire makeup of the conversation. Yeah.
Speaking of sandwich,
yeah,
I just brought that in today. That's called the sandwich. That painting.
Wow, who did that?
I did.
No way.
I just finished.
You're pretty You're a great artist.
It's called the sandwich.
It is. The waves are very Japanese.
There we go. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And part of that anatomy is based on my girlfriend.
Oh,
yeah.
we'll keep that between us and
Yeah,
everybody
yeah,
else
yeah.
who's
Well,
listening.
next time you see her.
Totally.
He's right. Okay, let's talk about the medical thing. And
Sure.
I want to prelude this by saying for years, it was all medical marijuana.
Yes.
That was the reason. Was the medical marijuana just a means to an end to what it is today? And let me further say, I travel a lot across the states. I have a home in the Midwest, in Missouri, which just legalized it.
Correct, yeah.
Full recreational too. But everything started with this medical. And I've since then gone in dispensaries, and I asked the owners, I said, hey, what today is your percentage of medical marijuana? And the majority of them have told me very low. It's dropped down.
Yeah.
It's why you want medical when it's full recreational? Everything is there.
Right.
But at the time, if I'd have said that to you 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, you would have said, oh, it's totally medical. That
Totally.
would have been your whole push to get
Right.
So how do you...
How do you rectify that? I mean, how do you reconcile that? Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think, I mean, there is some truth to the fact that, the industry was started under the medical guise, but I believe that it was really the easiest conversation at that point to have. I mean, if you have been familiar with cannabis or have used cannabis at some point in your life over a period of time, you would have already known that there was medical benefits to it. We didn't need a doctor to tell us that. Indigenous peoples have been using this plant for eons for medicinal and spiritual benefits. So that was already kind of proven. We just, unfortunately had people in place in power that either refused to open their eyes to that fact, or just blatantly disregarded it, or didn't believe it. And so it was an ends to a means.
Yes.
But it also was necessary at that point because, I mean, I use cannabis recreationally, but I feel that my whole life it's just been a medicinal quality herb that has been implemented into my lifestyle. And so I don't consider it to be anything else. Recreational just means it's easier to access for people, for me, in my mind. The difference between medical and recreational currently is if you have a medical card in the state of California, you actually don't pay an excise tax. You will still have to pay the sales tax, local sales tax, state sales tax on a purchase, but what you will be relieved of is a 15% excise tax. Now, when you think about it, that savings is based off of your overall expenditure per year. You have to renew your medical card every year. So a renewal of a medical card is a few $100s. So if somebody's only spending a couple $100s a year on cannabis for their medicinal purposes, it doesn't make sense to get a card because you're not going to save what you've ended up spending to receive that.
What does
that
it cost
card.
nowadays to get a
I'm not exactly sure. Back in the day, I believe it was about $200.
Okay. What would you say is the approximate percentage of people still coming in on the medical?
So I'm only recreational. I'm not a medicinal dispensary. And the biggest reason why is the state created not two separate licensing, but two separate reporting requirements. So if I were to be an adult use recreational dispensary along with the medical dispensary, I would have to inventory each one of those and reconcile them separately.
Yeah.
Now, in and of itself, I mean, cannabis and our requirements for selling product and inventorying, reconciling our inventory and reporting is tremendous. I knew this when I started, but I didn't realize the tremendous amount. And so to try to be efficient, you try to cut down on as much work. Now, medical people can come into our shop and, purchase products. I try to keep my products as cheap as possible. I mean, I sell award-winning products at award-winning prices, and that's been my motto with Fifth and Green this whole time.
Right on. I mean, it has gone down so dramatically, the
Yeah.
price. In Oregon, at least, where I'm more familiar, as I've lived in Brookings the last couple of years until moving to Crescent City recently. But is that there is this huge price. Are prices going to continue coming down?
Well, I actually believe, ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that the consumer drives product prices. Supply and demand is, the capital, that's the definition of capitalism. So, at the end of the day, I think that prices might tend to tick up for retailers in terms of the pricing that I'm purchasing products for. We had a gluttony of products on the market space over the last couple of years, and what that did is obviously, it lowered prices. But in turn, that also meant that we're going to lose some producers in this state. There are a number of producers, cultivators, manufacturers, distributors that have not renewed their license and do not plan on it. What that will do is going to restrict production. And so anytime you have a supply and demand style commodity, you have a lot of product to sell, prices go down. You have a little product to sell, prices go up.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, I kind of see maybe a little uptick in pricing. And that is basically due to the fact that we're going to go through, again, some more bumps in the road in establishing this industry. So, I am going to continue to try to keep Fifth and Green's prices at a point that can compete with the other state of Oregon and keep it to a point where I think our community can afford it. As a business, you have to make money at the end of the day. But as a great or a morally ethical businessman, you try to find a margin that works for you as a business and works for the community in itself. And I think that implementation is really what separates the good operators from the bad, because there are a lot of operators in here who just really, and I'm not saying here in Crescent City, but just in general, when you have cannabis, there is a lot of operators who don't care about the community and they're only there for that dollar. I have the mindset of, I have product in my shelf that is, I'm not selling glass. I'm not selling something that can sit on the shelf forever. I want people to consume it. Love was put into produce it. I want people to be able to consume it and appreciate it. And so low pricing is really, that's the biggest deal.
So I'm gonna compare a few things, throw this at you, about the difference or the same things that go on between the liquor business and the cannabis business. When I walk into a liquor store, in Oregon, you got to go to the liquor.
It's controlled by the OLCC.
Yeah. Okay, but I could go into Safeway here and buy liquor. When I go into a liquor store, I see all sorts of products. I see if it's martini stuff, do you want moonshine? Do you want the 99 with all the flavors?
Right.
Do you want good old gin and about 5 different types? The State Line is a good place up on State Line.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a classic example. And it's fun to go into. And yet, the marijuana, what we all kind of know, if you go in an extreme manner with your drinking, it has health consequences.
Absolutely.
It has other issues. I know that many people have said alcohol is the bane of mankind. Billions of people have died because of alcohol-related problems.
Definitely.
And every day I think there's 1,000 people die in North America from alcohol effects. Is it true that marijuana hasn't really caused any quotable death?
I don't know if that's. We can't attribute cannabis to specific reasoning for death. There's been no known that I know of, cases where somebody's ingested so much cannabis that they, suffered from lung failure in any one instance. But to back up a little bit, obviously cannabis is going to have some adverse health effects. We're consuming smoke. If you smoke a flower, there's organic matter in that flower. And just like tobacco, tobacco, truthfully, it's a plant. It's grown. You can go to a tobacco farm and see tobacco grown in the ground just like cannabis. And so it's very similar in that respect. There's definitely health. There's health benefits for the cannabis in terms of what it can do for specific things in your body, but also, if you're consuming a ton of it, it's not going to be very good for your lungs. At the end of the day, I think everything in moderation. That's really that's the going saying for health. Just everything in moderation.
Yeah, is getting into the marijuana business, is it a heavy expense? Is it a big expense? You got to deal with the state regulators.
Feds. It's weird. I have heard numbers, that would blow your mind to open a store. And then my experience is that, you do a lot of the work yourself. I'm an anomaly when it comes to this. I remodeled, built, the interior. We had a friend build the deck. So a lot of this stuff was sweat equity. And so I'm an anomaly when it comes to the amount of, capital it took to open the business. But I was cognizant of that. I didn't want an Apple store because that doesn't fit within my community. I wanted a mom and pop shop that looked inviting and appealing, and felt like home. When you walk in there, you're like, I'm coming to a friend's place to pick up my products. But with a cleaner establishment. I have heard some numbers that literally, would just, you would think to yourself, how would you ever invest that to open a business? I mean, it's four walls and it's retail. And so there's not a lot to it. But local ordinances also have prohibited a lot. Luckily for us here in Crescent City, I mean, our local politicians were Crescent City Council in and of itself, separate from the Board of Supervisors. They were very open to business. I mean, they're a business district. And so they realize that generating business sales is really the biggest thing, not to tax you out of business, because ultimately in cannabis, we're being taxed so much. I mean, people think that it's this gold mine, but at the end of the day, we're facing, upwards of 30% to 40% overall tax. And that's what we pay. And we don't get to write off payroll. So, I employ 6 people, 6 wonderful workers. I feel like I have the best crew, with all due respect to everybody else, but I feel like I have the best crew here in the city, and they know their stuff. But, at the end of the day, I eat that payroll.
Yeah.
And so, at the end of the day, it's a double taxation. I mean, we can get into the ins and outs of the constitutional, travesty that we see with the double taxation, which is unconstitutional, but we can't sue the federal government at this point. Class action lawsuits can happen, but, we can't sue the IRS for, giving us, bunk tax codes. The 280E tax code, which I know a lot of people don't understand, that is your basic business write-offs. Most cannabis operators, particularly retail, because we don't produce product, we only get cost of goods write-offs. So it definitely hurts. That's the biggest impediment to success, I think.
Are you still having banking problems?
I actually bank. We're really fortunate here. Coast Central Credit Union was a pioneer in offering banking services for the cannabis industry. They're based in Eureka, so they were really familiar with the aspect of cannabis, and they've been great. I mean, I feel so fortunate because there are so many operators out there that don't have access to banking. And the first 8 months of operation, we didn't have a bank account, so I was paying bills with cash, and I mean, there's just a lot of scary aspects with that.
Yeah, isn't that based on the paranoia that goes back 75, 80 years of
Absolutely.
being prohibited?
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is there's still a certain amount of, a selective percentage of people who don't want to see it, for whatever their reasonings are. And I mean, everybody has their own reasons for their opinions. But
ingrained in our
It's
psyche.
ingrained in our, I mean, and we can debate the history on why we're prohibitive on cannabis, but we all, I mean, if you're familiar with it, it was because the textile industry didn't want to see it. I mean, we created vinyl at the same time that, cannabis and hemp were basically, I mean, we still have tugboat ropes that were made in the 1800s out of straight hemp fiber that are still in use today. I mean, it's an amazing plant fiber. There's so many different levels and aspects to cannabis outside of just its psychoactive or recreational or medical benefits. I mean, there's textile benefits. There's gluing benefits.
Right.
I mean,
building.
It's insane.
Amazing.
There's a company based out of New Zealand called Hempcrete. And the gentleman I've met a number of times, he lives in Jacksonville, and I've gone to his house a number of times and have had long talks with him. But I mean, the buildings that they're creating with some of these, this new technology is just insane. And you add that they've been able to create a slurry they can put into a 3D printer now, and actually print a house using hempcrete. And it's just insane. I mean,
and it just might last longer, but
it will last. The R
last.
values of those are through the roof. We cannot build anything like that.
I'd rather grow hemp and seasonally cut it down, or some places twice a season.
Yeah.
Versus cutting down beautiful trees all around.
Absolutely.
Of course, they're against
the other benefits for hemp is, it's a great remediator of heavy metals from the soil. And so, that has been used in multiple other countries. United States obviously is behind on a lot of these aspects, but in other countries, they've used it to remediate petroleum sites. You plant layers of hemp over. The roots are deep, foragers. The roots go down deep, and so they will suck and pull the heavy metals out, they will then absorb those heavy metals into it, and then you can take that waste and remove that waste in the hemp. So there's a lot of Willie Nelson. He's done that in his gas stations all over the place, and that's something that I think that we're just kind of scratching the surface. We're getting caught up in this recreational smoking cannabis thing, but outside of that, there's so many other benefits to it.
Hemp is an amazing exciting
It is.
product, and it's the future too. It's the future. I know that the prohibition of alcohol lasted a whole whopping, I believe, 12 years.
Yep.
And it was over from the late 20s until, okay, and it went away. So it was bye-bye, or was it 8 years? I forgot.
Yeah, I think it was somewhere around
But
there.
marijuana sticks around, this as horrible, repressive. Just think of the people that spent their entire lives in jail because of a joint. It's absurd how many families will pull.
People lost their lives for it.
People
I mean,
lost
this
their
is
lives.
this. I mean, I'm glad you brought this up, because this is something that I wanted to make sure that people understand and realize, is that when we speak of legacy families and generational cannabis growers, we're talking about people who actually were waged war against. I mean, I grew up in an area where I actually visually saw, as a young child, SWAT team helicopters rappelling down and literally,
my goodness.
I mean, literally just kicking the crap out of family members for growing plants. I know people in my life who've lost family members in direct conflict because SWAT team members showed up at their door and shot them unprovoked. This is real. I mean, this isn't something that was created out of, campfire talks with families. This is real deal stuff. And people need to realize that the respect, and I'm not talking about respecting the legacy people, but respect where it came from, the lives that were lost, the altered realities of people and families that for 30 years was our reality. We just forged forward. We knew that was not right, and so you just never give up. You keep fighting, and you keep bringing it into the light, because that's how you fight darkness. You shine a light on it. And that war on drugs that started in the Reagan administration, we're still dealing with the ramifications of that today. And we'll be dealing with that for generations. I mean, generations of children have been harmed emotionally, physically, by this extreme view of, particularly cannabis in general.
This program is brought to you by Coors Light. I mean, they could advertise beer and at Super Bowls, but hey, you don't mention that marijuana. That's the worst stuff you could possibly do. Listen, we are having so much fun here. Time is just, in the radio business, you're having a good time and got good vibes when time flies. I want to thank you for tuning into Jacques Talks, and I'm Jacques Kepner, and we're at that midway point. Actually, we've got about 20 minutes to go. I'm your host for the remainder of the hour, and the reason you are hearing this conversation is because I am a part of kfug.org radio right here in Crescent City and beyond. Folks, I had an idea several months ago to get back into the broadcaster's booth, and I pitched this show to my esteemed colleague, Paul Kritz, affectionately known as the station manager, the man with the coolest voice in broadcasting. What I'm getting at is this: if I can do it, then you very well may be able to get into broadcasting too. If you have an idea for a show, pitch it to Paul, P-I-T-P, pitch it to Paul. I assure you that although Paul is a very busy and dedicated broadcaster, he is approachable. I assure you he will not bite except on the days that he's off. On a similar note, KFUG is on your radio right now because of those folks who've donated to this homespun local community radio like KFUG. Go on to kfugradio.org and you can find out more about how you can become a part of this fantastic, wonderful community radio station centered right here in the middle of the vortex of good souls of Crescent City, California. I'm looking through my notes here. We were talking about some of the paranoia, some of the weird stuff, how we compare this to alcohol, to the booze industry, and what the difference is. If I were to walk into your shop and say, for instance, I get a little paranoid on pot, I don't really want to, I don't want something too strong, because I notice so many of these things are so much stronger than they were back in the day. Yeah. I'm 65. Back in the day in San Francisco, where I grew up, where it was mild stuff. The Mexican and the Colombian weed, or occasionally we get some Thai stick, which was higher. But they were dwarfs in the compared to the high potency that we have in the marijuana today. Yeah. If I wanted to, let's say, come in and get something that's more CBD, but still just a touch of THC,
Right.
which gets me high a little bit. But I want something that would be like a martini for me. I'll have a martini. I'll have a beer after work when I relax. But I find that I'm worried that, oh my God, if I get stoned, I get paranoid. So do you have those can you kind of like a bud tender? Can they kind of work with you to?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's really the bud tender's job. I mean, at the end of the day, the bud tenders are listening to the consumer. Now, everybody's different. So, everybody's got a cannabinoid system, an endocannabinoid system inside of our body.
Yes.
We have multiple, and they're just receptors for the cannabinoids. And so, some people can be, affected by a huge THC number, and some people don't. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's flower that is available that, is on the lower end of the THC range, and has a little bit of CBD. Currently, it's a little difficult to find a flower-based, flower itself, the bud form, that has equal amount CBD and THC. There are a few strains out there, but a lot of that work has just been really difficult. The hemp market has kind of taken over some of that CBD marketplace, and obviously they bred out a lot of that THC. But for somebody like that who maybe is looking for a smoke, a flower that is on the lower end of the THC range, it's not going to be too psychoactive. Absolutely. I mean, I think most dispensaries carry lower THC range flower. Now, in that respect, somebody who might not want to feel too paranoid might want to venture into the edibles. When you get into the edibles and the concentrates, mostly edibles, it's a much easier to create an edible that is 20 to 1 CBD to THC, 10 to 1, 1 to 1, all these different ratios. And I know the numbers can be really confusing for people, and that's where the bud tender comes in. The bud tender has been trained well enough, hopefully, that they understand the labeling. Mostly, it's the labeling I think that confuses a lot of the people. So, a 20 to 1 CBD to THC ratio edible is going to give you 20% more CBD than it is THC. And we always, if somebody comes in and they're a little apprehensive, but they really want to try it, they've tried it before, they've become paranoid, we really try to tell them that dosing is a big part of personal responsibility, because as a person, again, our endocannabinoid systems are different, so we're all going to react differently to the same product. We could take the same amount of edible, the same edible at the same time. I would get a completely different effect than you're going to get. And so my bud tenders try to explain that to the consumer so that they're aware that, a gummy in a square might be 10 milligrams. You can cut that in half, and that would be generally a half dose of a 10 milligrams. So you get 5 milligrams. And so there's different tricks you can do. And then literally individually, you have to find your dosing range. As cannabis affects us individually, we have to know where we can go, where we want to go, and where we don't want to go. And unfortunately, that does require some experimenting. That whole experimenting thing with, psychoactive compounds is, it's a real deal. You have to really experience it and know it, and then find out where you're comfortable.
That's so important, because I'm afraid, I don't know, it's really the way it is. I'm afraid to go back into it because I dislike the body high that I get. And I get, I think I see the helicopter coming over with these guys hanging off the ladders. They're going to
terpenes are a big player in that. Terpenes are the flavonoids in cannabis. They're found in the oil. I mean, terpenes are found in every single plant that has an aroma. And so terpenes play a role in the type of effect that the cannabis product is going to give you. And so, I am not ever going to claim to be a scientist or a particular expert in terpenes, but I do know that terpenes play a large role. The mixing of those terpenes, how your body takes those terpenes and digests them, that's where cannabis is moving into. Before, we didn't know, when I was growing up, we didn't know cannabis, just like yourself. I mean, it was brown, it was green, had seed, didn't have seed. Right. But now we've got, we've figured out terpene ranges, a whole cycle and, tree of terpenes and what they do and their effects on us. And so by blending those terpenes in products, or finding products that have terpenes that are more conducive to the type of high or effect you want to get is where the consumer is moving into. And that is being provided by the producers, manufacturers. They're providing terpene printouts so that you know a percentage of limonene to terpenoline to, caryophyllene. Those things, while seem chemistry inducive, are actually pretty simple to understand.
Wow. And the endocannabinoid receptor that we have in us is we don't have a celery receptor in us. We don't have carrot receptors.
No,
we don't have meat receptor. But we have this thing, this endocannabinoid receptor in us.
Yep.
Tell us, highlight that.
Well, I might have a chocolate receptor somewhere in my body because I'm a chocolate fiend. But at the end of the day, the endocannabinoid system, again, I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but from what I understand, we've evolved with this plant for eons. And the endocannabinoid system basically is layered in different. We have a vascular endocannabinoid system. We have a neural endocannabinoid system. We have a muscular endocannabinoid system, and they're just little receptors that basically take the amino acids, the terpenes, and they process that. And then they take those and they place them in the spaces of our body that they're supposed to go. That's pretty much the layman terms. I mean, there's a much more defined definition on that. But for people, it's basically we accept the plant and its properties better than most other things we ingest.
But I still got to try. If I try some experiment with something, I could turn into a chimp and where am I?
Right.
It's like, where fish, how fish get high from seaweed.
Yep.
Yeah, well, that's an old bad
right?
joke. Sorry.
Hey, I mean, animals have been experimenting with compounds on Earth since the first inception of of Earth.
That's so bizarre that we have this endocannabinoid receptor built into our bodies. It's
right.
like, okay, guys, there's something there.
So, the greatest thing about this also is that, we are still so naive when it comes to this product and the compounds that are in this, that having it recreationally legal is also expanding medical research. The legalization of cannabis nationwide will tremendously increase the amount of federal funding that medical research companies can use to really study this plant, because there's tremendous benefits here. And again, we're really just scratching the surface. There has been no funding from the federal government for cannabis research over the last 30 years. I mean, it's been negligible when you consider it, when you compare it to other research funds. And it's starting to increase. And so that, I think, is a good thing, because we will start to really find out what these endocannabinoid systems in our body are about. What are they doing? How are they interacting? All these different things with cannabinoids, because we just haven't had that access.
We have about 15 minutes left, and that you said the feds. I have so many questions for you, but you said about the feds. Mm-hmm. What's your prognostication if you had a crystal ball and you said, oh, crystal ball, when are the feds going to legalize marijuana? What's your take on that?
Well, that crystal ball's pretty old. I've been looking through that crystal ball for at least 45 years myself. I'm 50, and those are questions that I wish I had an answer to. But I think that at the end of the day, what most people think of in terms of federal legalization, I don't think is going to happen. And if it does, it's going to take a very long time. So most people's interpretation of what federal legalization would be basically open borders, state to state, commodities trading. I don't believe that's going to happen. And the reason I believe that that's not going to happen anytime soon is, if you think of, we're a capitalistic society. And so every state has invested tons and tons of capital versus in the private sector, public sector, in the implementation of their specific laws to their state. And so that's a lot of money. And if I'm an Oklahoma resident who invested my capital to fund a grow operation in my state, because that's how my constitution or that's how my law was written, I have to produce my cannabis here in state to provide for my state population. I don't want to see California cannabis shipped to Oklahoma, because I've invested my capital. That just means to me that I've got competition in my state that is going to make it very hard for me to be successful. And so I think we're going to see a lot of fights. If it gets to a point where we can openly trade, which I don't think the federal government's ever going to do, because I have another point about that, I think we'll see a lot of different infighting between state players. I'm in California. Sure, I produce a lot of cannabis and I'd love to sell it over everywhere else. But at the end of the day, there's players there that are doing the same thing. And so I think for now, cannabis produced in a state is going to stay in that state. Now, the federal government, when it comes to legalization, and another layer of interstate transport is how do you get that product from California to Oklahoma or from Oregon to Florida? That's a distributor. I mean, that's the alcohol model. And so in the federal government's eyes, the alcohol model works really well for distribution. They don't have a lot of, trucks bailing off the highway and selling, black market Budweiser to anybody. And that's because there's only a handful of distributors who are licensed to distribute that nationwide.
Yeah.
The government definitely does not want to see 5 million distributors distributing cannabis throughout the country. Unregulated driving cannabis through, interstate highways, all this way. They don't want to see that. Imagine from a federal standpoint, their inability to manage that.
Right.
So I think in the first place, that's probably going to be the bigger determining factor federally from shipping it state to state, is that the federal government's not going to want to see that many distributors.
But we do know that many people do ship it, and that brings to mind a couple of years ago when that guy was the latest scare where he was sending bombs to the congressman and the Senate and everybody. So they went down this lockdown. They started opening up every package. And what the federal government found out was that this huge amount of marijuana, primarily the flowers being shipped across this country or being mailed in the United States Postal Service, and they couldn't. I heard that UPS or FedEx they could open up any package because they're a private company,
right?
But the U.S. government to have them open it, they got an injunction and a judge and a warrant, but they found millions of pounds being shipped.
I mean, open your eyes. So
I mean, it was just crazy how this was happening. Now, you said Oklahoma, Missouri, where I have a home. Missouri was famous, and it will be famous again one day for hemp growing. I mean, the wealthiest people in Missouri back in the day were hemp producers and shippers.
Well, we were required at one point in time as a landowner in the United States to grow hemp, for the cause. I mean, it was way back in the day. I mean, so, we've had a history with this plant for a long time. Now, the thing about hemp and cannabis is, they're related, but they're separate. We don't know exactly the species they were growing back then, the strains they were growing for hemp, but we do know it was textile hemp. And so, the government did require us to grow hemp. And I think that, the large scale states like Missouri who have access to larger agricultural spots could grow hemp great. But I don't think Oregon, California is ever going to be a player in the hemp industry. We just don't have enough space, agricultural space, to grow that type of commodity. It doesn't make sense. California's based its commodity and farming off of food production, and it's not going to switch to hemp production in those large fields. Now, Oregon has a little bit more of the eastern area to grow. It's got large-scale wheat and, grass and hay fields that it can grow. But again, when you match that up with the actual volume and size of some of these Midwestern areas that are growing corn and soy and whatnot, that's a diverse crop for them. I think that that's where hemp will definitely play out in a larger scale. It's going to be more of that Midwest area.
Do you think more and more people are growing their own pot these days?
Definitely.
And so that takes a little bite out of your biz.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not sure if it takes a huge bite, but I mean, everybody wants to grow. It's not as easy to grow a plant as most people would think. And when you do, again, you're not getting enough necessarily to really supply you for a year. And a lot of times, I mean, it's not as quality as some of our, growers on the market. They've been doing it for a long time, and there's tricks that they've learned. And so I think everybody should grow a plant. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, that's why we voted for this law.
Who's your biggest competitor? Is it still the guy out on the street selling bags of weed? Yeah,
I mean,
illegally? Black market?
Definitely. I think not necessarily here. Maybe in other areas. The black market area here is always going to be. I mean, we've got cannabis, and I think the black market, it's just a social trade between people at this point. You got a friend who's had 6 plants in his yard, recreational grow, and he's got some excess cannabis, so he's going to give you some, or maybe he's going to just pop it off for a little bit to you. I mean, that's where I see the black market locally here. Now, in other areas, larger metro areas, obviously the illicit black market's a huge deal that they're battling.
The state has their claws on you as a dispensary owner for restriction, and they are testing, right? All the marijuana, you have to, it has to show that, I don't know if it's organic or without mites or all these other.
Yeah, there's minimum requirements for testing. There's like a minimum standard.
Oh.
Now, a producer or a cultivator can actually go beyond the minimum standard, pay for a larger test platform that can include all different kinds of things, like like I was mentioning earlier, the terpene profiles, things like that.
Right.
But yeah, testing requirements are big. Testing is one of those things that's weird. I know there's a lot of labs in this state and in other states that are pay for tests. You pay for a higher test rate, and so there's a lot of cultivators and producers who shop labs. It's basically a lab shop. Lab shop. You go to this lab, you get a test you're not happy with, you just take another sample from the same batch, you take it to another lab, and you shop for a higher percentage. And I've really tried to weed through the products. I vetted a lot of my vendors, tremendous. And it's just part of the deal. There's going to be bad products out there that aren't tested well, but normally and generally you can trust the label and the bud tender to explain most of that stuff to you.
The bud tender is all important. I went into a bud tender and I said, so I used to eat marijuana, but then I got a pot belly. Okay, another bad joke. Sorry. You know what I was like? I'm looking on Google just before I get here. Okay, what are some funny jokes? What do you call all those burn holes in your shirt from smoking a joint? Potholes. Okay, that's it.
Man, those are dad jokes.
Those are bad jokes. Paul's in the other room going, okay, he was doing real good right until now. He started talking like a chimp. We have a few minutes left here. I think we've got about, we have 5 minutes left.
Hey.
Let me run down a last little scenario here.
Yeah.
What's your best hopes for you here in Crescent City? How do you see yourself? You're doing I think a beneficial. You're producing an interesting product that is, in my book, a lot better than booze. Causes a lot less problems than booze.
It does.
But where's your hopes and dreams?
I mean, my hopes and dreams are for our community to continue to grow the industry. Unfortunately, we don't have an ordinance locally. We have a grow ordinance, a cultivation ordinance here in Crescent City, but it's a fairly restrictive indoor grow. I don't foresee the interior of the Crescent City limits being a producer of cannabis. But what I do see is that we have areas that have historically grown pretty great quality outdoor cannabis, sun-grown cannabis. And we don't have the movement at our supervisor level to even get into this talking about growing here in our county. They have a cultivation ordinance that is so restrictive and archaic that it was laughable when they put it forth at the county level. We have the Smith River area is a valuable agricultural piece of land that could produce some quality cannabis for this area. We have one. I take that back. We have one cultivation license issued in this county, and that is issued to a company called Vibe by California, and they are located on Elk Valley Rancheria tribal sovereign land. They came to an agreement with the Elk Valley. Well, that agreement was in place by a previous operator. Vibe bought that operator out. The unfortunate aspect to that is, Vibe is a large-scale corporation, and they're the only ones that are able to benefit from the production of any manufactured product in this county. And that's just an unfortunate thing because none of that money really stays here. They've hired out-of-town workers. They've tried to hire local workers. And again, I just think that that's where I'd like to see us be able to have future conversations is how do we increase the industry here? How do we produce a product here that can be marketed locally and marketed around the state? Now, I know there's a gluttony of products and out in the market now, but that doesn't mean that a well-produced product, branded properly and efficiently produced, couldn't be successful. And so that's where I would like to see us be able to get to, because right now my most local product is Humboldt. And while everybody knows Humboldt, a lot of product was produced in Delnor County. Gasky Range, the mountain range is there. Some of our TPZ lands. Now, a lot of the county council back in the day, and I'll make this quick. they are worried about the TPZ and the PO zones, basically our timber production zones, and how that fits within the different parameters for environmental concerns for growing. But I know those things can be worked out because Humboldt's done it, and their zones are the same.
Well, if you partake in your own product, I got to say, you look very young. I would have said you're 25, 30. You turn out to be 50. So I'm going to start smoking pot.
Thanks.
Pretty soon I'll be 33 looking years old.
You know, I'll tell you what, it's family. Love and family.
Love and
that's
family
what it
is good. It's good. Thank you again for coming on. And it's been so interesting. And there's so many more questions I have for you.
Let's do it again.
Just do it again.
Let's do it again.
We'll do this again maybe every, I don't know, whatever. We could get you to come in and talk about it. And you've been a real pleasant guest. And thank you for coming in. You're the only one that really took me up. I was... Again, reaching out to everybody, who are you?
Oh, man, I love K-Fug. I mean, you know, I'll tell you, I mean, Paul interviewed Jesse back in the day, and it was that outreach, I think, that really precipitated the conversations for us to be able to outwardly, you know, show ourselves. And so, you know, I thank K-Fug. I thank the supporters of K-Fug. And, you know, everybody out there, support your local radio stations. I mean, these people are tied into our community. They are part of us, the fabric of our life, and they deserve the support. So I appreciate you guys, and thank you so much for having me, John.
Yeah, I really appreciate meeting you, Eric. I consider you a friend, and I will come in and treat me, or not treat me, I don't want any treats. I just show me something that would be like a cocktail.
You know what? Come on in anytime, and you know, my bud tenders or myself will definitely try to steer you in the right direction.
Where is the address of your name?
We are at 1607 5th Street, right behind the Safeway. Cool. You can't miss us once you turn on 5th Street. It's
the Greens,
big old green sign, and right behind Safeway there.
All right. Lastly, next week, tune in. We'll be having, I believe, Dr. Kirk and Devin and Cameron from the Porta Pints. Dr. Kirk is now involved in, he's buying the Porta Pints. He's also got the Tsunami Lanes. We're going to be talking with them about the good, bad, and ugly of the beer, the local brewery in town here on K-Fug. I also wish to thank the universe for guiding me to K-Fog. If I can do it, you can too. I implore you to get involved in your community radio station. And I can't wait to hear your stories, trials, interests, passions, causes, needs, what else, services, and contributions to this community and beyond. You can reach out to me, Jacques, by checking in with the station at kfugradio.org or calling 541-999-7680. Again, a special thank you to Paul, my now fellow esteemed colleague, whom I am honored to work with and alongside of. Thank you, Paul. I know you're out there close by listening, and thank you for that. Again, thank you, Eric. You have a wonderful, blessed day. Thanks again. This is Jacques Kepner signing out.